the heart of really what we come to do well is understand our clients.
Understanding what the needs of the family are.
Help them make some decisions.
Preparing the next generation for what's to come.
Being on a first-name basis, getting to know their stories.
Working through their questions, their concerns, and figuring out the solution that's best.
They trust us enough to come in and help them solve that.
You really feel at the end of the day when you add value, there's a great sense of accomplishment and reward.
Henry David Thoreau once said, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." In managing wealth, there's an awful lot to look at. Taxes and trusts, family meetings and bonds, and everything in between. It's why we rely on those who know each of these fields so deeply that they can see where others are merely looking, who can focus on what's best for clients over generations. After all, that's what expertise is.
Are you paying too much in taxes? The Green Group can help. There's a reason the most successful owners, breeders, and horsemen select the Green Group as their tax advisors. They save you money and share successful strategies. Over the past 40 years, the Green Group founder, Len Green, has owned and bred some of the best racehorses in the history of the sport, like Eclipse Award-winning champions Jaywalk and Wonderwheel. His DJ stable competes at the highest level and has received the game's most prestigious honors. Len Green's in-depth, hands-on industry knowledge, combined with cutting-edge tax-saving strategies, has produced positive results for his clientele and has made the Green Group the top-rated accounting and tax firm in the thoroughbred business. For a confidential and complimentary consultation, contact us at 732-634-5100 or visit our website at www.greenco.com. The Green Group, proven strategies to save you taxes.
Bloodhorse Plus, available through bloodhorse.com, provides exclusive, timely, and unmatched content to subscribers, including Fox Sports, Bloodhorse branded weekly programs, a detailed stakes winners section, behind-the-scenes videos from Bloodhorse staff, on-demand access to deeper horse statistics, and a $5 monthly credit to equineline.com. Upgrade to Bloodhorse Plus today.
Hi, I'm Gary Falter with OwnerView, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Just a few days ago, we announced the addition of this webinar to give you a chance to hear firsthand about the HISA Anti-Doping and Medication Control Program, also known as ADMC. It goes into effect on Monday, March 27th, and today joining us is Lisa Lazarus. Lisa is the Chief Executive Officer of HISA. Thank you, Lisa, for being here, and welcome. And also with us is David Ingordo. David is a thoroughbred owner, bloodstock agent, and then David's also part of the HISA Horsemen's Advisory Group. So David, welcome, and glad you're here. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. I expect the panel discussion is going to last about 45, maybe 50 minutes, and we're going to leave time at the end for audience questions. So if you have a question for either Lisa or David, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your questions. And we'll answer as many questions at the end as time allows. And don't feel you have to keep detailed notes because we're recording this entire session. So you can go back at a later date and replay any part or all of it if you'd like. So Lisa, let's just get started. Before we talk about the launch on Monday, March 27th of the ADMC, can you give us a 2-minute overview of HISA and the Horse Racing Integrity Welfare Unit, I think that's called HIWU, and why this is an exciting time for racing?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here. So HISA, under the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act, HISA has to actually appoint an independent anti-doping agency to essentially run separately the anti-doping testing all the way through to prosecution. And HISA appointed Drug Free Sport International, which is the same entity that does all the testing for the NFL, the NBA, the NCAA, PGA Golf. They're really top shelf, a very impressive and well-established organization. And we essentially appointed them to run the anti-doping program, and they created the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit, which is a unit that is customized specifically to run equine anti-doping in the horse racing industry.
Okay. Now, David, you've spent most of your life in thoroughbred racing. How do you think HISA is going to improve the whole racing landscape?
Well, in my lifetime, we've never had uniformity. Every state's different. Every track might have different rules. Under HISA and the anti-doping portion of it, especially, we're going to have uniformity. I think it's going to make, as an owner and the people I deal with that are trainers, people I help manage, for once, we're going to know exactly where we're at. It's not going to change state by state. And I think it's going to end up being a big positive for, the gambler and the owner who put up the money in the game and the people that put their time in, the trainers and the jockeys, to get these horses to the winner's circle.
Okay. Lisa, there's something called can't race flags. So what are the issues that can prevent someone from racing and have one of these can't race flags associated to them?
So a can't race flag is actually not related at all to the anti-doping program. Those are in place for horses, jockeys, and covered persons, trainers who aren't registered. So when we launched the racetrack safety program in July of last year, we sort of did it in a bit of a soft implementation with regards to the registration requirement. But come Monday, we are really going to prevent anybody who is not registered with HISA from racing, so they banned at the entry box unless it's resolved, prior to post time. And the only other things that can result in a can't race flag are mostly around jockeys not having their concussion baseline test or their annual medical. Those are really the only reasons that would necessitate a can't race flag.
Okay, so a can't race flag is associated to a person, not a horse.
It could be also associated to a horse if a horse isn't registered.
Okay,
that would be the only reason a horse would have a can't race flag, or if a horse doesn't have its vaccines, or if it doesn't have any of the basic requirements that have been in place for quite a long time now.
Okay. So let's jump into the anti-doping medication control program, or the ADMC. So Lisa, we hear lots of messages about the launch on March 27th. Is the ADMC program for sure going to launch, or do you think, is there any chance there would be any delays? Or are we good to go on Monday?
So I'm really quite confident that we're going to be good to go on Monday. I mean, we're still waiting for FTC approval, so it is ultimately up to the FTC. But what I can share is that Monday is the 60th day in the 60-day window that the FTC has to either approve or reject our rules. And all indications from the FTC are that they're going to go ahead and approve them on Monday. And the reason why it's so important for us to be 100% ready is that the way that it works is the minute the FTC signs that order, our program is effective and state racing commissions lose jurisdiction to conduct anti-doping testing. So there's no you got a week or 5 hours. It's the minute the order is signed, HISA is effective and state racing commissions lose jurisdiction to conduct anti-doping testing.
So on Monday, do you expect everything's going to be a seamless transition, and will people notice changes at the racetrack?
So they will. So first of all, I'll say I very much hope it's going to be a seamless transition. That's what we're working towards. But it's a massive undertaking and it's a national initiative. So I expect that there'll always be little things that might happen along the way. But I believe that we're really well positioned to launch seamlessly. I think the first thing people will see is that we've implemented a paperless collection system. So, when the very first test is taken, it's going to either be Parks or Mahoning. They're kind of in a race based on post times on Monday, who will have the first test. But the test collection representative will come in with an iPad, and the iPad will be preloaded with the day's race card, and they'll sign to acknowledge the receipt of the horse's sample on the actual iPad. They'll get an email that basically documents what took place and their sample collection number and essentially how the chain of custody is going to work. So to me, that's really a professionalization. It's more transparent because you can follow the chain of custody, and it really puts it in a more sort of objective, professionalized context. So that's one of the things you'll see. I mean, then the other big things that will happen behind the scenes that you won't see are that, all of the sample kits are now standardized. I mean, we did our audits of tracks, like some of the kits and some of the ways that collections were being conducted were really not up to standard or up to the way kind of a secure anti-doping program should be run. The lead times to get the samples to the lab are very much shortened. Every test must be sent that day or the next day at the latest. You can't hold on to samples and store them for days at a time, which was happening at a lot of places. And also the lab turnaround times will be much quicker. It's a mandated 10-day on post-race tests, and you'll see a 5-day vets list clearance test, which I think is a big improvement in most jurisdictions.
Okay, well, you kind of hit on my next question. We heard there are a lot of changes in the test barn and the procedure for sample collection. Can you talk any more about how this is going to be better than the current system?
So I think the first thing I'm going to say, and I know we talk about it all the time, and David mentioned, is that it's uniform. It's one system for everyone, right? So if you're a trainer that runs horses in California, you're going to be their tests are going to be analyzed. They're going to be collected, stored, shipped, analyzed, and prosecuted the exact same way as if that sample was collected in Kentucky or New York or Ohio or Illinois. And that's, I think, the biggest difference.
So, today most testing takes place after the race. How will the new program improve that testing process?
So, post-race testing is post-race testing. I think post-race testing is an important, obviously, component of any robust anti-doping program. It plays an important role, but our system and our test implementation plan is going to be heavily weighted towards out of competition testing and intelligence-based testing, because I think history has shown that post-race testing is not really able to kind of, to the extent that there are people cheating, people breaking the rules. Post-race testing does not always reveal that, is not always the most effective tool. So we're going to be using various different tools in the toolbox to make sure that the sport is clean and everyone's competing on a level playing field.
Okay, I'm going to jump over to David, but I would like to come back, Lisa, to the out of competition testing here in a moment. But David, you're part of the Horsemen's advisory group. Can you talk about that group's input to this whole ADMC program?
So there's 19 people on that group, and it's a diverse, you've got Mark Cassie, who's a Hall of Fame trainer, Graham Mosh, you've got trainers, you got owners, you got someone like Maggie Moss, I believe she's won an Eclipse Award as leading owner. Kirk Wyckoff, very active in the game. We've got some, smaller trainers on there, meaning, Kelsey Danner is doing well, up and comer, but not a super trainer. We've got all the levels of the game in there. Ron Moquette from the Midwest, Mr. Golds from out in California, newer owner. We've got a broad scope of people on there, a lot of type A personalities for sure. And it's a good thing. So what I've liked is they've kicked us issues or different ideas that the ADMC has, and we've been able to kick them back and poke holes in it, and not just to be, contrarian, but to be practical. And we spend, I'd say a lot of us are spending an hour or two a day going back and forth. Lisa's been exceptionally accessible. I've just met Ben Moiser from was it Drug Free Sport, who I've been pretty impressed with. And they're taking our criticisms, critiques, praise, and trying to put it into what's going to be best for the industry. And it's, you know, something that I'm happy about, and I think needs to be expressed, is that it's not just for the top 10% of the game. This is for everybody. It's from the people that are at the smaller tracks to the people that run at the, you know, the Kentucky Derbies and at Churchill and things like that. This isn't an elite program. It's for the whole sport and the whole spectrum of the sport. And something that I think needs to be remembered and applauded for what's going on.
Okay. And I'd like to remind the audience, if you have a question for either David or Lisa, just use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll field as many of those as we can towards the end. So, so Lisa, you know, the industry has seen some pretty high profile medication cases that take years to resolve. You know, with the adjudication timelines, what would they look like under the ADMC program going forward?
So I think one thing that's really important to recognize up front is the HISA rules actually sort of put the various substances into sort of two buckets and two rule systems. One is called banned substances, which are your sort of doping substances, things that I think we would all associate with cheating, things that should never be in a horse. And the other is controlled medications, which are typically your therapeutics. So on the banned substances side, I think one very big step change, which actually correlates to sort of international and other sort of sport regulatory programs, both in equine sports and human sports, is that if you get an A sample positive, one of those banned substances, those doping substances, the horse and the trainer are automatically provisionally suspended. So even before the B sample comes back. Now, they do have an opportunity within 48 hours to have a hearing if they want to. If there's something really important they can bring to the hearing body to potentially have that lifted. But the burden or sort of the impetus shifts. So in that situation, obviously the owner, trainer, et cetera, are going to be very motivated to have that case resolved more quickly because they're going to be suspended until such time as that case is resolved. On the controlled medication side, we obviously don't think that that's an appropriate thing to do, and that the trainer and everyone should have their sort of due process before there's a sanction. But those are essentially, there are very short timelines in place for those cases, and they have to be resolved within 20 days of the notification.
Okay. David, you want to add anything to that?
No, one thing we had talked about, you know, earlier before this started was, I think that's a huge point, that if you have a substance that's a contamination, you can prove it. And I think, Lisa, we said, like, use scopolamine as an example. You know, if you get something that was in the hay, under our current rules, until the 27th, you would be disqualified. And, you know, if you had a filly run third in a stake or something, you not only lose the purse money, you lose the value to your bloodstock. The trainer gets a black eye. You know, it's all around negative. This new rule, which I'm a big fan of, because it's some common sense that I feel like was missing from the old set of rules. And it's another thing, you know, if it's not on the banned substances list and you prove it's a contamination, you know, for lack of a better term, it's like it didn't happen. And you don't lose your money as an owner. Your trainer doesn't get any kind of public, fog over them, and your horse keeps its placing, whether that's a win or something in a stake or whatever it is, helps your value. So I think that's a huge step forward from where we are today to what the rules are after the 27th of this month.
Okay.
So if I could just maybe say a little bit more about that, because I think, David obviously raises an important point, and I put a little bit more kind of technical clarity around that policy. So, philosophically, we wanted to achieve with this program is we wanted to get rid of people who are cheating. We wanted to obviously appropriately punish people that are not being responsible about managing their medication programs. But we also don't want to hold people responsible or ruin the careers of anybody who is the subject of something they can't control, right? And has no real nefarious impact. So the atypical findings policy, which is what David just described, is something that I actually developed when I was working on the sport horse side for the International Equestrian Federation, because I saw a recurring problem of environmental contaminants getting into feed, et cetera, that having absolutely no impact on the race or on the horse, kind of causing problems with the results and really unfair consequences. And so there are 27 substances, and these are the scopolamines, the ractopamines, the synephrines, for those of you that understand kind of these substances, that have been designated by the ADMC committee as specified substances and therefore subject to the atypical findings policy. And if a horseman or a horse tests positive for one of these substances, it goes through a special process. It goes through a scientific review, where the sort of scientific review team looks at it and says, okay, is this more likely to be contamination than not? And they can do that through an analysis of the concentration, et cetera, and through some give and take with the trainer, understanding what the horse has been fed, what the environment's been, where the horse has traveled to. And if they don't have any reason to believe after that process that it was a recent administration that was intended, then that case will be dropped and no violation will be notified and will be like it never happened. Those will not result in a purse disqualification. And I think, I really believe that those three pillars really get the balance right in what we're trying to achieve as an industry.
So Lisa, you mentioned, a real goal is to get the cheaters out of the industry. And can you talk about investigations going forward? Do you think there's going to be more of these, like the Service Navarro trainer type bus, and you hope that's going to happen? And how are we really going to get the cheaters out of the game?
So what I really hope is going to happen is that anybody who was previously breaking the rules or running afoul of the rules sees HISA coming, reads our rule set, sees who we have on staff, and kind of cleans up their game. So I actually, I don't hope there are any big busts. What I will say is that we're very well placed to root that out. We have Sean Andrews, Sean Richards, who was the FBI agent who was in charge of those Navarro and service cases, et cetera. He's running the investigations team for HIWU now. He's the guy who's working on all of the intelligence collection, who's working on a sort of smart, focused test implementation plan with the HIWU folks. So I think we're going to get, all of that experience and intelligence. We're going to be able to put that to use in our program. And I really believe that if there are folks that are cheating, and I have to sort of stay agnostic on that because I'm the regulator and I'm new to this process. But if in fact people are cheating, I believe that our program will catch them. I really do.
Okay. So what does it mean that the labs are going to be harmonized?
Sure. So what it means is that screening limits are, kind of the big thing that people kind of talk about sometimes, but they're really the game plan, right, that the labs work against. Okay. And if labs are using different screening limits for the same substance, they're not uniform, right? It means that somebody could withdraw 3 days and be okay. Somebody withdraw 5 days and not if they're in different states. So what we've been able to do through HIWU is, first of all, we have fewer labs that are going to be testing samples. The RMTC accreditation was like an eligibility criterion to be considered. Then you still have to be able to enter into a contract with HIWU and meet their performance specifications. So I think we're probably going to be about 6 labs. With those 6 labs, they've all agreed the screening limits for all of I think we're up to about 350, 400 substances, the most common ones, to make sure that they're essentially calling them positives at the same level. And that, there are a lot of things that HISA brings, or this new program brings, that I think are going to be steps forward and going to be great for horsemen, especially owners. But to me, that's the biggest game changer, because if you're calling a positive at different levels in different states, it's just very confusing the horsemen, and it also potentially can act as a trap, because if you're racing in jurisdiction A and everything's coming back negative and you're all good, and your medication program is good, and you go to jurisdiction B and suddenly you got a positive test. It's like, that's a difficult situation for a horseman to be in. And I think that our program is gonna make that concern go away.
Sure. Okay. So can either or both of you respond to recent claims that the ADMC rules aren't rooted in science? Have you heard that? And what are your thoughts around that?
Nobody would say that to me, because I would tell them they were a fool. So I've never heard that said to me. I'll let Lisa answer the rest of it.
You know, there's never been more science, I think, used to work. First of all, we never had a national uniform program, right? And we've never had kind of one scientist or two scientists kind of bringing everyone together on the same page. Everything we do, the whole, one of the things that's so important is that, you know, those of us who are running this program, we don't, you know, all we want is a better program for the industry. All we want is to improve the industry. We don't have local relationships or people that we like better than other people. Like, we just want a good system and good rules. And so everything we do is based on science. And I read a quote, I think it was maybe from Clara Fenger, who said that HISA doubles down on, you know, on contamination. I mean, that's completely untrue. I mean, it couldn't be less true, because the atypical findings policy that I just described to you doesn't exist in any racing jurisdiction currently. You know, this is a new program that we put in place based on experience internationally with other equine anti-doping programs to deal with an issue that I think is a really important issue for horsemen and also for the integrity. Because we don't want, you know, we also, you know, the public is obviously not going to be as educated as we are about what every substance does and means, right? So if the public hears about a positive test in the contamination space, they think, oh my God, like there, you know, there it is again, you know, doping in the equine space or doping of horses. But actually, if it's an environmental contaminant that got into feed through no fault of the trainer or owner, then that's just what it is. And so this program allows us to tell the story the right way, and I think to report information accurately.
Okay. You know, we hear about there's misconceptions out there, and, you know, some groups are opposed to the HISA and what you're doing. Is this, are some of these groups just have a misunderstanding, or is it just inaccurate information? I mean, you know, help the audience understand, you know, why this opposition is out there, and what can be done to bring everyone together.
Do you want to go, David, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, well, we could both probably going to say close to the same thing. So I'm licensed in the state of Kentucky and as an owner, and then other jurisdictions. By being licensed in Kentucky, I'm then an HPBA member. I checked this before the call. And the HPBA has never asked me my opinion of HISA. And I see them out there, and I'm picking on them now, spreading misinformation, which I know because I'm on the Horsemen's Advisory Group. And I asked Lisa and other members of HISA and HIWU, and why other groups are trying to make this some heinous activity for the industry, I don't understand. As a horseman, my wife's a horse trainer, my uncle's a horse trainer, my stepfather's a horse trainer. They have never had it better, where as of the 27th, everybody in the country is equal. They have zero positives, and Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong on what I'm saying. But to my understanding, every trainer, whether you're the winningest trainer in the game or you're brand new, you're all equal. The testing is going to be uniform. You'll be able to move forward with a uniform set of rules. And this last bit about the contaminants, to me, most of the positives are in that zone, you know? So I don't understand why the vitriol towards what we're doing. I've yet to have someone that opposes it tell me a salient fact. You know, they're not, by signing up for HISA and being a covered person, no one's coming and taking my gun. They're not going to just barge into my barn. They're not coming onto the farms. I mean, so much of it is fear mongering, for lack of a better term. And all it's done is really clear it up. And I know that people like myself have a benefit of having a relationship with Lisa to ask questions, to meet a Ben Moiser who doesn't have a dog in the fight. He doesn't care if it's David Ingordo or David Smith or Bob Baffert. He doesn't care. He's just there to look at the testing. It's the fairest it's ever been. You know, the jockey club isn't involved. Lisa's not a puppet. You know, I mean, it's crazy, some of these mistruths that are put out there. And I just think it's going to be better. I have as much to lose as any person in the game by accepting a HISA from a personal standpoint. I want it to work because I see it's how our game moves forward. I see it as being better for myself, my clients, my friends, my family by all these rules. And that's the biggest endorsement I can give it. Why these other groups, and I get upset because the HPBA isn't talking. They're not giving Lisa a chance or anybody to have a constructive conversation. I've presented it to different, they don't want to do it. Why? I guess they just want status quo, and status quo is not going to move racing forward. It's not going to be better for any of us that own a horse. It's not going to catch the intentional cheaters. This is the best in my lifetime. And as a student of the game, the history of the sport, I've ever seen it to be where everybody from the smallest owner to the leading owner in the country has a shot at equality and a level playing field. And all these other people, I'd love them to tell me what their agenda is, except to be a pot stirrer, because the rest of it is really good. If you have a bunch of positives for therapeutic medication as trainer right now, on the 27th, you don't have those. You start anew under the HISA and HIWU rules. That's the greatest thing ever. Anybody that's doing whatever, you got a whole fresh start on the 27th. It's a rebirth, and it's all for the positive. So why people knock it? I'm at a quandary too, and I can't have one of those knockers ever give me a really good answer, except, well, I just don't like change. And this game can't grow if we don't change. And, there's the social license is a better term, from different organizations. If we want racing to stay around, this is what we need to do, and we need to get behind it. And by the way, it's a law, so it's here, and we need to follow it.
If I could just maybe add, that was really well said, David, and I can't say a whole lot more than that. Maybe just make 2 points. Like, one of the things that's challenging for me is that when I do speak to people a lot of times who are opposed to HISA, and I say, what do you want from an anti-doping program? They tell me, I want to get rid of the cheaters. I want to make sure we're being sensible about the realities of being a horseman and the medications we have to use. I don't want to be held responsible for contamination. And then when I say, well, actually, a program does those things philosophically, those are exactly the sort of philosophical underpinnings. Like, we completely agree, And if you want to tell me you don't like our rule on Butte or whatever, tell me that. Like, we'll put that in the hopper. We'll get that analyzed. We'll get that discussed. That's what we do at the Horsemen's Advisory Group. None of these rules are set in stone forever, but the overall true principles are. And I think it's just funny to me where I have these conversations and we sort of agree on what the program should be doing. And then I'm kind of left wondering where the resistance is coming from. And I think it's, obviously some fear of change and the fear of, what's it going to mean for me? This is my livelihood when there's this program. And what I try to tell people, and I really believe, is that if you're doing things the right way, if you're paying just a little bit of attention, because we are pummeling people right now with information, like over and over and over again, to try to make sure that they're like retaining some of it. If you're not living under a rock and you're kind of doing the right thing and following the rules, you're going to be fine, and you're actually going to be better because you're not going to feel like you need to break the rules to win. That's really ultimately, we're trying to protect trainers, the vast majority of it, which, want to compete clean. They don't have to feel like that's not a good choice for them. And just one last thing, just to clarify on the starting the clean slate. David's absolutely right. Under the law, every trainer starts with sort of 0 violations with respect to the multiple medication violations or any sort of multiple violation policy. In other words, in any sanctioning regime, you look at whether somebody has a prior violation when you determine, what sort of sanctions they're going to get for the current violation. So that gets wiped clean. But just to be clear, if somebody is serving a suspension under a previous violation, they still have to serve those suspensions out. And actually, even just so everyone's clear, is that even if there's a sample taken on March 26th by a state racing commission, if that's a positive test, the state racing commission can still prosecute that, take that forward, and if they're successful, they have to still serve it, just so you get all your priors basically wiped clean.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great points. So let's move on to a topic of bisphosphonates. So that's a hot topic today. They're going to be banned starting March the 27th. However, they might already be in a horse's system. They can remain in a horse's system for years. So Lisa, how will HISA address the bisphosphonates that were in a horse systems prior to Monday, March 27th?
So that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. Let me start by clarifying that any administration pre-March 27th is not a violation. Sort of all those horses are sort of grandfathered in. Only administration post-March 27th would be a violation, okay? Now, we recognize that bisphosphonates are challenging or tricky because of the fact they can stay in a system very long, that you can even get a negative and then a positive when there's some remodeling. So the program or the system we have in place for bisphosphonates is, one, we are asking any owner or trainer, if you know your horse had bisphosphonates before and you have a record of it, it would just be very helpful to us, and it would protect you, obviously, if you could upload that into the system. There's a way to do that in the HISA portal, or even just send us an email, let us know, attach the record. That obviously makes it very easy for us, right? But we're not going to just sort of stop there, because we recognize the consequences are very significant. Because if a horse tests positive for bisphosphonates and it's post March 27th, that horse can't race in the US anymore. So what we're going to do is do really an in-depth investigation. And our scientists have sort of assured us that there's ways for us to determine whether or not it was a recent administration or an older administration. And we will only essentially move forward with a violation if we feel very confident that it was a post March 27th administration.
Okay, just to clarify what you said, a horse that tests positive after March 27th, that it was, they got that after that date, the horse can't race in the US anymore. Is that correct?
Yes, as long as the administration was post March 27th,
Right,
not the positive test.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. David, anything else you want to add to the bisphosphonates?
As a horse owner and a horse buyer, I would spend the extra money before you buy a horse to make sure you test for it, and especially if they're coming out of Europe. Because, I'm not, Lisa, you correct me on the science, but it's anywhere from 1 to 3 years that bisphosphonates can stay in the bone matrix of the horse. And we've had issues of it, prior to any of this, using it on label usage in older horses, and getting a positive test, almost a year after administration. So you have to be pretty sharp about this and be, I'm going to be very diligent on my purchasing. And if I'm importing horses from anywhere, because the laws are different in other countries, what's legal there is now not going to be legal under our racing rules. So everybody needs to be sharp, ask the questions, get statements if you need it to protect yourself. Because it's a problem I can see. I hope it isn't, but it's one I'm preparing for, that you buy a horse and after the 27th, something happens and you can't, there's going to be some conversations had that are unpleasant for some people, but I would be very, very mindful of that when you're acquiring any new horses.
Okay, especially overseas.
Especially out of Europe.
Yeah.
Especially out of Europe. Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know, David. So with so many owners in our audience on the calls, can you give us an idea of the ways where HISA has already benefited and will continue to benefit thoroughbred owners?
I think probably like the biggest thing that I would say is that I genuinely believe that if HISA is successful and it does its job, that it's going to prop up the industry and therefore make our industry as a whole more valuable. When you look at a sport, any sport, especially a sport where there's a significant amount of wagering on, integrity and safety are just such key components to be able to sustain the sport and keep it relevant, keep it important, keep it growing. And if we do our job, and I think we're headed in the right direction on equine fatalities and equine injuries. And if we do our job on the integrity side, that's just going to essentially build the industry, prop it up. And obviously that's going to benefit those participants. We've talked a lot about the ADMC program. Obviously, having a strong anti-doping program where owners know that when they do right by their horses and their trainers are doing a good job, that when they set up to run, they're going to be, they have the same chance as everyone else, that there's nobody out there who's using things that they shouldn't be using and are getting an advantage. And I think, I generally believe, I think there are definitely people who have some concerns or some trepidation, but I really am confident that once this program gets rolling and is implemented for a period of time, that we're going to be able to convert the vast majority of the industry into being believers, because this is just really, I think, what we need to make happen going forward.
Okay. David, you're an owner, you know a lot of owners. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, there's a couple things from my side. One, this will, I was basically born at the hospital on Santa Anita's grounds. Okay, so like my mother could see the track, the one turn from her room. She always told me when I was born. So I've been around this my whole life. So when I say in my lifetime, literally from the day I'm born, we've never been able to say we have a person or an entity we can go to that is in effect overseeing us. And so when new owners come in, they say, well, David, how do we know, this, that, or the other thing's all done the right way? And I'd have to say, well, you have to, my experience is this, and we got to stay away from that. And we don't want to do this. But now where there's an entity that I can say, well, this group, HISA, is over our industry, the testing. There's actually a body of investigators that's unbiased, that can look into problems. The hearsay and the whispers out there of different things, we're going to be able to check it out. Or HISA and HIWU is going to be able to check it out. And as an owner, I like to handicap. We talked about Service and Navarro briefly in this. I hate to say it, handicappers handicap in the guys that look like they're doing something a little bit shady because we watch trends. Now there's actually going to be an investigative arm that's doing this that can probably stop those things from happening. And, from an ownership standpoint, it's going to be a lot easier to attract new fans. It's something that we talk about. Toba discusses it a lot. Gary, we've done a couple other panels for new ownership. I saw you guys doing stuff at the sale we just finished. We can give our industry a lot more credibility that if you come in brand new, there's a lot more controls in place than there have ever been before. And I think that's a huge selling point. We're going to weed out the bad guys are probably going to weed themselves out on the 22nd because they're going to be afraid. And that's a big thing. Just a presence, just having cameras in stalls stops a lot of, games from being played. So HISA's overall just presence is going to be something that, again, in my lifetime, we've never had. I think it's going to put a lot of things in the right place, and it's going to help grow the game again. I mean, we have a wonderful sport. We were just at the sale. A lot of my clientele are new owners. Len Green and West Point, two of the sponsors of this, they get a lot of new people in the game as an accounting firm and as a partnership. And we can look at them in good faith and say, this is a level playing field for you to come in. And then, luck and skill of your associates comes into play, not a needle.
David, you make a great point because back in 2011, when McKinsey came out with the McKinsey study, one of the things they recommended was for the industry to develop new tools and resources to encourage thoroughbred ownership. Hence OwnerView was developed in this conference series. I look at this as falling into that same arena, new resources and tools to encourage ownership, things we didn't have in the past.
And it's, again, Lisa can correct me, it's a law now. And we have a federal law overseeing our game and bringing, we had all these fiefdoms. And, for me, as having done it my whole life, I accepted it. I knew, okay, Kentucky's like this, Louisiana's like that, New York's like this. For me, as a lifelong person that is never going to change what I do with the industry, I'm doing this the day I die. But a person that's coming in as a pastime or a way they want to spend their money, instead of having a yacht, they want to have racehorses. It's not that appealing to explain all that. So I think this resource might be one of the best things once the kinks are worked out. It's not perfect. I'm not going to sit here and say every part of it's great because it needs work. And Lisa and her team are the first ones to realize that. But it's one of the best opportunities we've ever had. And, I want to get behind it and make it work.
Okay. Well, I think this is a good time to wrap up the panel discussion because we've got questions that are in the queue. So we're going to move to the Q&A session, but we're going to hear from West Point Thoroughbreds, our Q&A sponsor, and then we're going to sort through the questions and come back in a moment with those questions.
How do you become the gold standard in racing partnerships? One horse, one partner, one victory at a time. Congratulations to all our partners who have made West Point the gold standard for the last 3 decades.
Okay, first question. What body will hear and determine contamination claims, and what is the timeline for adjudicating these claims?
So if you're talking about the substances that are subject to the atypical findings policy, which are those environmental contaminants that I discussed earlier, it will be a scientific review of the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit. They will look at essentially all of the information available through the laboratory documentation package. They'll also liaise with the trainer for additional information. And that review should be completed essentially within 20 days. Was that the whole question? Was there another piece I was missing?
Nope, that's it.
Yeah, okay,
exactly.
great.
Okay, here's a question. How liable are owners who are part of a partnership / syndicate when their exposure to the horses, trainers, grooms tends to be very limited or controlled when a trainer may be found to violate the rules? So what's the owner's liability, if any?
So it's not that different, I don't think, from how it's currently being treated, but this is how our rule works. The trainer, whoever is registered within our portal as the responsible person, which is 99% of the time the trainer, that's the person who has essentially the strict liability for the horse. That's the person who's responsible for the horse. The way the rules work is that if an owner basically took a decision or had a role in that violation that contributed to the violation, HISA might add them as a party, but that would actually require like specific facts. Like an owner called up and said, I have this substance, looks amazing. It may not, it may test, but try it. That kind of thing would obviously expose the owner. But just being part of a syndicate would not, except for the obvious consequences. If the horse is suspended, there's obviously a de facto consequence on the owner, but an owner would not have any sort of suspension or sanction on he or she specifically, unless they played a specific role in the violation.
Okay. So here's a question. Where does the National Steeplechase fit in with HISA?
They're not currently covered by HISA.
Or not? Okay. So the possible environmental contaminations in the test results, how does the appeals process work? Is there a hard timeline for a horseman to file this claim? And how's it
So it's
ultimately
automatic.
resolved?
So let's just say you have somebody has a horse that tests positive. I'll use ractopamine because it's a very common one. Okay.
Mhm.
The covered person, typically the trainer, will be notified that you have an atypical finding and we're going through a scientific review. It's automatic. They don't have to actually ask for it. It happens by operation of the rules. We will, though, say to them, do you have anything you want to share with us? Because a lot of times also we're using it, like, for example, when I was at the FEI running their anti-doping program, we found a whole hay manufacturer that was causing problems globally because their hay was contaminated. So part of it is we're going to want to liaise with the trainer to see whether or not they're using something that we need to basically warn the entire industry to avoid or to deal with. So we'll liaise with them, get whatever information is appropriate, and within that 20 days, make a decision. Now, if in fact the scientific committee believes, because there are, in some very unique cases, some of these contaminants, typical contaminants, might be used intentionally for performance enhancing objective. And if there's reason to believe that, then what will happen is that it will be like a normal case. They'll get notified of an anti-doping rule violation. They'll have their opportunity to defend their case, present, have their due process. But what the atypical findings policy does is it has this like pre-review before you get to that point. And we believe the vast majority of cases will end there because they will be contamination.
Okay. Here's a question. Is there a specific game plan for how HISA's program will be used to help improve the PR of the horse racing industry?
So, my job is obviously as a regulator. And so right now I'm really focused on making sure that people have the information, but making sure our program runs well. But I really do believe that once we're operational for 6 months, a year, whatever you think the appropriate timeline is, that there's going to be a story to tell. And I think it's either going to go kind of one of two ways. It's either going to be look, the industry either was in good shape or people really cleaned up their act before we started. And look, we're having rigorous, intensive, intelligence-based testing with, with appropriate screening limits across all the laboratories, and we're not seeing very many positives. So HISA itself, or the threat of it, seems to have had an impact. Or we're going to see lots of positives, at which point we say we've now kind of cleaned up whatever needed to be cleaned up. So I think both stories have value, and I think we're going to have one of those two stories to tell.
Okay. So where can we find what the limits are for the various substances to be tested for? Where can somebody go to find that information?
So with regards to controlled medications, those are available like on our website, and we have there's the technical documents that are published on our website and HIWU's. The laboratories don't provide the screening limits for the doping substances or banned substances because those should never be in a horse. And so you don't, the view is that you don't need to know those and, try to kind of titrate around them. So those are not available, but the controlled medications are.
Okay. So last year, HISA began the registration process for all participants. Does a member of a racing club or racing syndicate need to register with HISA?
So the prerequisite is, are you licensed by a state racing commission? And if you are, you generally have an obligation to register with HISA. Wait, realize, and you touch a horse. So when I say and you touch a horse, in some jurisdictions, you have to be licensed, even if you're like a food service provider or you're, a PR person. We don't require those people to register. It's, are you licensed and do you have interaction with a horse? I will say though that with regards to owners, we only require one designated owner per horse to allow the horse to be eligible to race. So you have to pick one person. If you're an ownership group, you got to pick one person to kind of be the contact person. It doesn't mean that if there's a violation, they have more responsibility. It just means that they're our contact person, that they're registered in the database. Because of course, if the horse does test positive, we notify the owners as well as the trainer. So we need to know who that person is.
So David, you deal with a lot of new owners. Here's a question about do new owners coming into the game need to register with HISA, and who's telling them that? How do they know?
Well, in what I do, we have, and like you've got the West Points and these partnerships, they typically have administrative people that help the neophyte owner get organized. What we do in my office is my administrative assistant, Gretchen Feld, she will, the owner comes in, I get her set up with that owner, and we register them, we get them licensed, we register them with HISA. And it's a really simple process. You register one time and it's done. It's not like a license, it's annually renewable or every 3 years, depending on what jurisdictions you're in. It's pretty simple. So if you are coming in, the trainers, the managers, the agents, whatever, partnership management needs to get these owners on board. And I just have all my people do it, just the easiest way to do it. The larger, owners are doing it. In our groups, I think it's, don't quote me on this, but my memory serves, it's 2.5% ownership or more. You need to actually be licensed, with the National Racing Compact and then each jurisdiction. I have them do it, or they own, a certain percentage, 2.5 or better. I have them sign up. So the trainers need to be cognizant of this, or anybody that's in a management position like myself that's trying to help people get involved.
Okay.
And there are benefits I can just add to that quickly is that, if you're in our system, like you'll get emails that are designated specifically for owners, you'll get information, you can also get some information yourself if you're on the portal. So, there really are benefits. I know people were a little bit worried in the beginning. Does it mean we're going to come to your barn? We're not. We're very busy doing other really important things. We're not going to come to your barn. I think there's probably value, but I do want to make clear that as long as the horse has one designated owner, that horse is legally authorized to run.
Okay. Got about 5 more minutes, a couple more questions. There's still several in the queue. So what is the likely impact of HISA on the smaller racetracks to be able to comply with their resources? So financial, vet oversight, and so on. So what's the impact going to be on especially smaller racetracks?
So, the one thing I'll say to that is there's not a single small racetrack that has wanted to work with HISA that is interested in safety that we haven't been able to find a way forward with. We have some of our cost allocation methods and et cetera really take into consideration, the small racetrack, and the only ones that have really struggled are those that just philosophically are against HISA. I'll give you one example. Fauner Park in Nebraska, which is a great track, and we really respect the ownership there, and we were really hoping to work with them, and they wanted to, I think, do the right thing, and we sort of had a plan in place. But the problem is that in order for HISA really to be affordable, to racetracks and ultimately to horsemen, is that we need to keep the money that's already being spent on anti-doping and safety in the system. Okay. And we sent, some people might have heard this before, but we sent an assessment letter to Nebraska, where if they work with us and they let us use their staff that was always doing anti-doping testing, so not adding anything to them, just doing the stuff they've always done, their bill for the entire year would have been $11,000, But they chose, because they're against HISA, whatever, not to opt in, okay, not to participate. So what that does to Fauner Park is that means that now Fauner Park, and the reason why I say $11,000 is that our costs were $271,000, but they had $260,000 in credits. So basically in spending they'd spent in 2022, right? So when they declined to allow Fauner Park to benefit from that $260,000, Fauner Park then had a bill for $271,000, and that wasn't tenable for them. But if Nebraska had cooperated with us, we would have easily been able to kind of work through with Fauner Park, and they could have exported their signal. So I'm hoping that we can resolve that, in the future, and sort of work together towards a solution. But as long as you're a racetrack that kind of wants to work towards and work with us on these safety goals, I think we can always find a path forward.
Okay. All right. Last question, David. Do you see this program increasing new owner activity at all ranks, especially the claiming ranks, due to mitigating risk and alleviating some of the previous stereotypes about our industry?
100% I do. My specialty and what we've done a lot is development of young horses. Whether it's with my partnerships, my clients, my own money, I like to go to the yearling and 2-year-old sales and take them from square one, hopefully to the winner's circle. But I want some action this summer. I'm a fan. I love it. I'm a junkie to do this. I'm going to claim some horses, and I'll feel better about it than I would have in the past with the rules that are in place. And, the Horsemen's Advisory Group is working with HISA on like waiver claiming rules, different things, when you're trying to get the horse into a race and after the race, when you've claimed it. There's some nuances that HISA is working on that aren't getting a lot of publicity in this sphere. And, a lot of people get into racing by claiming a horse. The Horonis family claimed their first horse, I think it's 11 years ago, and they won an Eclipse Award, I think 8 years in, and had Flightline last year, all from claiming a horse. So it's a really big gateway into the game. And anybody that's looking to get into it, you're going to have the best odds in your favor outside of luck and the different things that go into it in claiming a horse.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good time to wrap up. I'd like to thank Lisa for all the insights that you provided. David, great responses from you. Really do appreciate the time. Lisa, if there's any questions people have, after we hang up, what would you recommend they do? Who at HISA could they contact if they have any follow-up questions?
Suddenly my unmute button's not working. Anybody on this group, certainly owners, can absolutely contact me directly at lisa.lazarus@hisaus.org. I can also tell you that there is a 1-800 number. I don't know it off the top of my head, but on our website at hisaus.org, where we have really capable helpline people that are working on this all the time. And I tell you, if you call them, you have an issue, they'll do all the work for you, any horse issue, et cetera. If you need to be registered, they will kind of hold your hand and walk you through everything. So, please feel free to reach out to me or to call the helpline. And if there are any issues, we obviously want to be responsive and help resolve them.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. And a special thanks to the audience, all the owners and participants in the audience. We hope you appreciate and got something out of today's panel. And we're back again on April the 4th, Tuesday, April the 4th, with a panel I think is going to be a lot of fun talking about handicapping. So we look forward to coming back on April the 4th. Good luck Monday, March 27th with the rollout, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a terrific opportunity. Thank you.